Hey everyone, Charlie here. Who are the two enemies of God? According to the Bible, they are the devil and death. Now, we see the devil show up very early on in the story as a serpent in Genesis 3, but there's this whole conversation that happens between the serpent and Eve about whether or not they will die if they eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They do eat the fruit, and then, of course, there seems to be a consequence of this, which is God says to Adam, from dust you were taken, from dust you shall return. And then they are kicked out of the garden so that they don't live forever in their sinful state. And we're often used to thinking of God's enemies as maybe these national enemies that he fought against in the Old Testament, maybe the Romans or Jewish leaders, maybe sin is an enemy of God. But I would say the two biggest enemies, and I'll show you why I think this if we go all the way to Revelation, are the devil and death, and that's how it is from the very beginning of the story. I'm going to skip ahead to Revelation 21. In Revelation 21, you get the description of the new heaven and the new earth, basically paradise that we get to enter into again. Very exciting. But before we get to that great moment, there is this discussion about the kingdom of Christ here on earth. And there's lots of different views about when and how this might happen. But let me just show you this at the very end of the story. You see that the devil is released from prison, and then he goes to attack the people of God and attack God. And it says, and then the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire, right? So before new creation, before new heaven and new earth, the devil has to be defeated. But then you also go down and see that there's this judgment for the great white throne. And it says this, that the sea and the dead, they give up their dead folks to be judged. And then it says death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. Notice how these are capitalized because they're being personified here as enemies of God, right? So from Genesis 3, you've got the devil and death, all the way to Revelation 20, where the final judgment, the final battle is happening, and you have the devil and then death being defeated. I'm going to show you one more place where this is pretty clear, because you're probably like, okay, Charlie, I get that the devil was the enemy of God, but I don't really understand why death would be considered the enemy of God. But in 1 Corinthians 15, start in verse 25, it says the exact same thing. This is, again, Christ talking about reigning in his kingdom before he hands it over to the Father. Then comes the end when he delivers the kingdom of God to the Father, after destroying every rule and every authority and every power, every enemy that stood up against God. For he must reign until he's put all of his enemies under his feet, and the last enemy to be destroyed is death. Again, there it is, death being personified, just like it happened in Genesis 3, just like it happened in Revelation 20. The devil and then death are the two big enemies of God through the Bible. Thanks.